Good afternoon from Cape Town. I'm here together with Angela Wamola, Head of Sub-Saharan Africa at GSMA. Hello, Angela.
Hello, how are you?
Good, and you?
Good, I'm fat. Thank you for inviting me over today.
You're welcome. You just launched your South African digital economy report. So we learned today that the digital economy is one of the major contributors to the economy in South Africa. So what other impact it has as well on the economy?
So when we look at the opportunity today to unlock the 710 million in Sub-Saharan Africa who are close to a 3G, 4G signal but have never used mobile internet, we ask ourselves, what is the challenge? What is the major barrier behind why are they not going online? And so looking at the digitalization study, we try to unpack what are some of these challenges that the sector is facing, and how can we provide more insights and policy recommendations and levers to help unlock that potential? In South Africa, it's 54% of the population that is already connected, which is double the number in Sub-Saharan Africa that's connected. So South Africa is looking at just 44% to close that usage gap. So the question is, how do we unlock that? And some of the insights that we come up with is, how do we ensure that the sector is an enabler for other sectors in the economy? The sector today, telecommunications sector, contributes 4 to 5% of the GDP, and that's about 200 billion South Africa rand. It contributes another 4% in terms of its contribution to government revenues through taxes, and 30,000 jobs directly, another 160,000 jobs indirectly. So this is just our sector, the telecommunications sector. The question is, if we are to unlock the potential in greater growth of our economies, leveraging the digital economy, then how do we enable the sector to unlock value in other sectors? And digital government as well. So accessibility in more services or simplified services from government, leveraging digitalization or digitization. And that's what we unpack in this report. And together with the report, we forecast and look at by 2030, if we were to adopt these recommendations, what would be the gap that is closed, given that today we are at 44% usage gap. And the number that comes up is that we can reduce the usage gap to 30% by 2030 if we adopt some of these recommendations. A third of these internet adoption would be from the adult population. A third of the population that will be unlocked through leveraging some of these recommendations.
So when we look at the recommendations, I remember from the presentation there was also a big pillar about policies and regulations, what you would suggest. So can you just share a bit of your recommendations towards policies and the public sector?
We have summarized in terms of the recommendations 5 or 6 areas that we think that the sector can work in partnership with government and other organizations as well as businesses in South Africa. The first one being that private capital needs to be continuously employed towards building more infrastructure, and not the infrastructure for today, but the infrastructure for tomorrow. So when looking at how do we continue investing in 5G, which is a great and a better technology that's more energy efficient, how do we unlock capital towards cloud computing and emerging technologies such as big data and AI? So the environment to attract sustainable investment is some of the recommendations that we come up with. We look at how do we categorize telecommunications infrastructure as critical national infrastructure so that the economies around lowering the costs in terms of energy are also geared towards that sector, understanding that it's an enabler of other sectors. We also look at, if you have to fiberize all this energy, all the mobile infrastructure, contribution from this, looking at how do we remove administrative costs such as right-of-way for fiber, because these are the small costs, that add up, that make the affordability of data, unreachable for the majority of our population. We look at also vandalism, which is very huge, not only in South Africa, but Africa as a whole. And so if we categorize this infrastructure as critical, what are the sort of stiff penalties that need to be adopted so that, similarly to the energy sector, that in the telecommunications sector, you deter vandalism and the loss of services, simply because people now understand that this is very important infrastructure. We also look at, the Electronics Communications Act has been here for more than 20 years in South Africa. And I think it's about time that we modernize it so that it reflects the digital technology that we are in today. How do we attract, like you're saying, that investment? What are the licensing or regulatory obligations that we need to look at to incentivize more investment in that area? Even when you look at development financial institutions, how do we attract that investment so that even as we look at energy models that are more cost effective, where are we able to show that partnership together with government? We also look at how, from the perspective of our customers, how do we reduce the affordability of devices in looking at that smart devices are looked as luxury items, and so they have a premium associated with it in terms of custom duties. In Africa, we look at the average, it's about 64% of the cost of a device goes to custom duties, and another 58% is in excise duties on the data. So when we try to look at making the device affordable, it goes hand in hand with the data. Both are attractive, and so from a consumer perspective, even as we look at how we can digitalize other sectors and governments, we need to also look at how we can make the devices affordable to the majority of our population, and particularly those in the rural areas where their income is very low for the households that live in those areas. How do we make sure that they are able to affordably not only afford the device, but also in terms of models that can be employed to make that device more affordable? So in a nutshell, the report goes into the details on some of these policy recommendations, but we're just saying that if we work together, and if we work together in terms of empowering the National Development Plan, the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, SA Connect, all these strategies are already in place. If we work together towards implementing them and making sure that the agencies responsible for implementation have the necessary resource to do so, I think we're on a good trajectory towards reducing the usage gap for South Africa by 2030 to 30%.
That sounds optimistic.
Very optimistic, but it's a collaborative effort. We have to work together, and that's why we position ourselves as an industry, as a partner for the developmental goals of Africa.
You just mentioned 5G, and if I look at especially the continent, so we still remain with a big issue with the affordability of devices. We need to lower the cost, and you mentioned taxation or import tax. So where should you start first? By developing 5G, where you need much more expensive devices, high-end devices, or you rather should, let's say, improve current infrastructure and changing your policies and taxes? What would you suggest?
It's about striking a balance, because the future is not waiting for those who are not doing anything about it. So we anticipate the future, and we do understand that the future is bright for Africa. How do we leverage 5G technologies, as I've mentioned, emerging technologies such as AI, because those lend themselves towards increasing productivity and lowering inefficiency. So we have to invest in that. At the same time, we have to look at how do we stimulate demand using existing technologies for digital consumers. So there's a balance towards digital consumers in terms of greater adoption of existing infrastructure, but looking forward towards these newer technologies in terms of a focus on digital businesses and digitalization of sectors. So they're not these niche areas of sort of like, how do we leverage these technologies to create private networks for these sectors, and that's where the balance is struck. Because as we look to the future, we'll develop more relevant content for the digital consumers who are migrating from the older technologies of 2G, 3G to 4G, and once that content is available on 5G, they're able to look forward towards adopting that because there is value for them.
I also heard some ideas, or there were some plans or some suggestions to say, look, let's put a different import tax rate on 2G devices and let's lower it for 3G, 4G devices. Do you think that is the right way?
Well, looking at 3G and its inefficiency, and the majority of those who are online today, I think 60% of the population who are online are using 3G and not 4G. I think we need to encourage them to move to 4G technology because it's energy efficient and it drives greater adoption for more better use of that technology in terms of productivity and use. So that's one area of looking at it. But the other way we should look at it is also that how do we therefore lower the costs of keeping 2G and 3G customers, because they're there right now, given that there is a challenge on the affordability of the devices and the availability of devices at the price point that our population are able to afford. So the question is, if we can be able to solve the challenge around the affordability of the device, the 4G device, we are able to just leapfrog even those customers who are still on 2G, and that is the 44% who have never gone on mobile broadband, towards moving straight into 4G and being able to use that infrastructure that's already developed, and even close the gap for even the countries, not South Africa, but the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, where there's still a long road in terms of near universal usage of 4G coverage. More investment still needs to go in at a 4G level for the consumer, but still greater investment needs to go in for the future in 5G and beyond.
All right. When we look at the report, are there some key findings where you say, look, those are topics or issues, opportunities who are quite similar to other African countries?
Yes, so the G20 is going to be chaired by South Africa next year. And when you look at South Africa compared to her peers, not only in the BRICS nations and others, we see that the challenge here is that South Africa spends far more in terms of capital expenditure per user compared to our peers in these nations. And these other peers in nations, in terms of their digital competitiveness, rank higher than South Africa. So that means there presents a challenge in terms of how do we make our dollar per user become less, right? How do we spread that cost so that more South Africans are able to use the capital invested, as opposed to right now really just a few of South Africans using. And that competitiveness, I think, will be derived in our report. We recommend that we can leverage learnings from other G20 countries, such as India, digital India, in how they have leveraged technology, how they have leveraged the power of 1.4 billion Indian population towards deriving those economies of scale. There is an opportunity for us to learn, not only in South Africa, but the entire Africa continent.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
There was TechAfrica News. You can find more on techafricanews.com.